Hey, what's up? We've got the Vespa 300 up on the lift. I'm going to show you the first few things you're going to want to remove in order to get the frame and everything ready to drop the engine out. So you notice immediately the seat's been removed, the under seat storage bucket has been removed, so we have access to the engine from the top. We've removed the side skirts on both sides, so all that stuff's out of the way. You can kind of see here, looks like Robot's already been doing something with the coolant hose. What's up with that, Robot?
Drained the coolant, so it's all drained out, nothing's coming out. Oil's already been drained out. I'm going to actually pull the muffler off. Pretty simple. There's 3 fasteners, T40 Torex. We're going to actually take the header joint along with the muffler off. You're going to need a wobble 10 millimeter to loosen the 2 header nuts up there, and then also the O2 sensor needs to be disconnected. Any of the fuel injected ones have an O2 sensor, and this is on this little bracket right behind this coolant line. It's actually easier to get to once you have this line out of here. Pop that connection off. It may have a zip tie. You may need to cut that zip tie, get the muffler out here. As you can see, I have the scooter on lift right here. Makes it a lot easier to work when it's up a little higher. One thing you can see is I have it actually up high enough where the tire rotates, but the center stand's not down right now. The front end of the scooter's been clamped and tied down, and I have this scissor jack in the middle. If you're doing this at home, you can actually build a little crate of some sort to actually support the center of the scooter and have some type of plywood base or whatever, door, whatever you want to put on, and use 2 tie downs to actually tie down the front. Because when we disconnect the motor, we'll put the center stand down, and that's going to support the motor, but the frame's not going to have any sort of stand to support itself.
And one thing Robot kind of hit on but didn't really elaborate too much on the exhaust is we're going to remove it from the actual cylinder head. We're not going to disturb that joint where there's that graphite bushing. If that graphite bushing is worn out, we've got another video that shows the replacement of that. We sell the bushings. We also sell a special tool for that. And also, you don't really need to remove the oxygen sensor. You can just leave that threaded into the actual exhaust. You just have to disconnect the wire. But that's it. So we're going to get the exhaust out of the way and come on back.
All right, so we got 5 fasteners loosened on the muffler. We have the O2 sensor connector out of the little clip. There's a little clip that actually retains the actual connection. You actually pry up on the little clip, pulls right out. Steve's going to remove the last fastener and drop the muffler out of the way here.
So we're using our T40 Torex drive. Get that out of the way. Heavy monster. Put this off to the side, out of the way. We're going to need that for a bit.
Next, we're going to actually remove the swing arm, disconnect the shock, remove the wheel temporarily in order to actually remove the rear brake caliper. The reason I'm removing the rear brake caliper, not disconnecting the hydraulic line, is so I don't need to flush the hydraulic fluid. You could actually just take the caliper off and lay it to the side. One thing, I'll jack it up a little bit more, and we'll put it on the actual center stand right here. And
we'll check back once we've got the swing arm and those other components removed so we can keep moving right along.
All right.
So Robot's basically got the Scooter West exclusive tool. Again, the tool for pulling off the swing arm. The part number tool, SAP, on the Scooter West website. What we got going on, Robot?
All right, went ahead and tightened to these 2 muffler mounts. You can see actually it's a little shorter here. This bolts directly in front of the actual axle right there. So it's all tightened up with those 2 Allen fasteners. Then you want to take a 17 millimeter wrench and just go ahead and tighten it. And
what we're doing is we're basically extracting and pulling this swing arm off of the bearing that the axle rides on, and what happens is that you heard that thing snap. That's why we made that tool some time ago, and that's how you use it. This thing will make your life a lot easier and keep you from breaking a potentially expensive part to replace, i.e. this cast aluminum swing arm. So we're going to continue removing that swing arm the rest of the way and then get the back tire off and keep on going. All right, so here we are. I've removed the last of the 5 fasteners, these Allen cap screws that keep the wheel on. We'll get Scott to zoom in there. You'll notice there's a wave washer and then a thick spacer washer. You want to make sure to put them back in that order. So wave washer close to the head, then the spacer washer. There's a total of 5 of those. These are about 30 mil or 35 mil long. Don't quote me on that. No Loctite or anything like that's required upon reassembly. You do want to torque these to the correct setting. Robot, what's the torque setting?
17 foot-pounds.
So go ahead and put that in our little bin of hardware. Pull the tire out of the way. For the sake of the video, we're going to show the centering cone that doesn't really need to come off. for the sake of this project, but it's always a good idea to be conscious of this cone. If you go to actually reinstall the wheel without that cone, you're going to have major issues and it won't really work that well. So that's the tire out of the way. Robot's going to talk about disconnecting the brakes next.
All right. You're going to want to take off the rear caliper. It's these 2 Allen fasteners. You're going to need a 6mm Allen wrench, just what you took off the wheel with. It's these inner 2 that hold it to the actual casting of the engine. You don't want to touch the outer 2 black fasteners and take apart the caliper. So go ahead and pull those 2 out. On the belt cover, there's actually 2 clamps that actually hold the hose to the engine. They're just one of the 10 belt cover fasteners. Went ahead and removed those. You can pull the actual caliper away. You see the brackets. And it also has some clips underneath the oil pan. Can't really see them from your angle, but the hose actually just pulls right out of those clips. So now you can see them on this end. I still have the caliper. Check this out. See, it's over here. So that's out of the way. It's not disconnected. Don't want to pull the lever and push the brake pads in there. But this is also a perfect time to change out your brake pads or put the upgraded centered metal brake pads that have stronger braking power. Part number on those I think is BP060EL, and that's the better quality centered brake pads. We have those available along with the OEM ones. I went ahead and took out the 3 fasteners that hold the airbox. You can actually kind of see over here the whole airbox is moving. I lifted it out. Steve's going to talk about those fasteners, the 3 different fasteners that hold the airbox.
Before we get into the fasteners, quick part number double check. The actual part number for the rear brakes on these particular engines is actually BP050.
050.
And Robot's talking about the BP050-EL, which are those E-Lig ones, which are really nice. So moving on to the airbox hardware, there's 3 screws that actually connect the airbox to the actual motor. This front one is the trickiest and most critical. You want to always make sure you put these back in the same order. You can notice it's the black fastener, it's the longest of the 3, and there's actually a 6mm flange nut that you got to reach up behind, around, and hold and make sure you don't lose and let that drop down and get lost. The other 2 fasteners are number 3 Phillips head. They've got a star washer that backs up between the flat washer and the head of the bolt. You got to remove those, put those somewhere safe. Now the airbox has been disconnected to the motor. I'm going to kick it back to Robot, and he's going to tell us what we're going to do next. Robot?
All right. I'm going to actually remove all 10 fasteners for the belt cover. On the very front, there's one that actually holds the coolant line. You know, you can keep the bracket with the coolant line. You might want to watch our belt replacement video. Kind of has an overview on removing the belt cover. And there's a 19mm center nut on the clutch. The reason I want to take the belt cover off, even though I'm only touching the top end, is it's an easy way to turn the engine over, you know, to set the piston to top dead center, etc. Makes the motor a little bit lighter. And again, you know, if you're doing a big performance job like this, upgrades, I would suggest putting a new belt, maybe a Polini variator. There's also an up gear kit available if you're looking for higher top speed. Pretty much we'll get it to that point. Belt cover off. Pop the actual wheel back on, but without the brake caliper still off. So just maybe 1 or 2 fasteners, and that's just there to support the engine like a tripod when we actually disconnect the motor. And after we get all that done, we're gonna jump into disconnecting the fuel injection, spark plug, coolant lines, miscellaneous whatever from the top of the motor.
So you can see we've got the belt cover removed. Set that off to the side. We're not going to need that for a while. I've gone ahead and put the tire back on with the centering cone and just a couple fasteners. The reason for that is when we go to take the engine out, this is actually going to support the engine and make it sit at a nice thing so it's not flip-flopping all over the place. I think that's about it for the back of the motor. We're going to disconnect the rear shock on the other side here momentarily, and then Robot's going to tell us what's up next.
All right, we're going to go ahead and lower the bike and go over disconnecting the fuel injection, spark plug, various hoses and cables that are under there.
So basically hopping into this compartment here. So we'll let Scott get reset and show you what to disconnect in here.
All right, we're on the top side of the motor. We're going to disconnect some items, and other items we're actually going to leave alone in the interest of saving time. Starting from the front of the engine and moving to the back, we're going to go ahead and pop the spark plug off, use like a long pair of needle nose, and you want to actually pull the spark plug cap off into the plane that it's on the spark plug. So pull that away. Next, you want to disconnect this hose clamp for your valve cover breather. This is the original equipment hose clamp that's on here. It's a one-time use hose clamp. and you're going to need a sharp pair of dikes, and kind of just fold it away, and it will actually loosen up. And you can see there's actually a little tab right there. Get underneath it. You may even want to use a screwdriver or something, but you can pull it right off. And we'll replace that with a regular worm gear hose clamp. You pull that away. Next, you got the coolant line. We're going to leave the thermostat housing on the actual cylinder head. Most likely it's going to be the original hose clamp, much like this. Need to cut it off. This scooter, I already have a worm gear clamp. We'll go ahead and take that off. Next, we're going to take the intake manifold. There's 3 fasteners that hold the intake manifold. And the easiest way to take them off is to have an 8mm wobble on a 1/4 inch drive. You may want to get the fuel injector out of the way. In order to do that, just push on this little tab right here and pull the connector away, and that disconnects your fuel injector. Over here is your coolant temperature sensor. There's a little boot, and you can pull that away, and there's a tab. It's a little difficult to get to, but you pop the tab off. I'll go ahead and do that. Get your finger underneath the tab. I didn't really use any tools, but basically I just pulled that tab away and pulled the connection off the actual.
Use those go-go gadget fingers.
Yeah, there you go. After you have this loose, you're going to be able to gain access to the 2 wires that go to your starter motor. That's underneath this tube. There's a ground strap at the rear starter connection. And directly under this throttle body, you're going to need a 10mm wrench to loosen the positive connection. One thing to keep in mind, I actually have the battery terminals disconnected in the interest of safety. This thing's got a boot on it. You need to pry that boot away. After that, you're going to want to loosen some of the wiring from the actual engine. On the engine, there's some of these plastic clamps that hold the wiring to your engine, and you can get your finger underneath these clamps and actually pop them up and pull your wiring. And there's also one down here, works much in the same way. You can see some of this wiring actually leads over to connections over here. We're going to actually disconnect some of these connections. In order to do that, you want to pull the screw up. All right, loosen this bracket. Different models have different arrangements for how these connections are under here, but they're all pretty much the same way. This is your alternator connection, and this is your pickup and oil pressure connection right here. You want to take a pair of needle nose or dikes and release the tab actually that's underneath this. It's a lot easier if you just pull the actual tab and leave it with the connection. You can do that with both of them here. So go ahead and get those out of the way.
Because he's not cutting them, he's just pinching them together so they'll pop out.
Now I'm able to disconnect the connections here. And this one's much like that O2 sensor connection. Pop the little tab. You can see it's retained underneath that clip. You also have some various zip ties that you may want to cut. As you see right over here, zip tie for the connections going to the starter motor. Go ahead and disconnect that. We'll come back and we'll have all this stuff loose, and the motor's nearly ready to pull out.
So we've got all the fasteners disconnected so we can kind of pull the throttle body out of the way. You'll notice, like Robot said, all the cables are still attached. Taking a piece of baling wire, we just kind of strapped it around it and strapped it to a spot on the frame just to kind of hold it up and out of the way.
And I went ahead and used my 10mm wrench and loosened the positive connection to the starter motor.
And Robot says the only way to really get to that is to kind of get the throttle body out of the way. So it's kind of an important step.
And you got some of the wires. We can get those out of the way. You got the motor, the connections that stay with the motor, these 2 connections. So those will stay with your motor. And pretty much everything's disconnected right here at this point from the top of the motor. So we'll go on to loosening the rear shock and loosening the main engine swing arm bolts and pull the motor out. Go from there.
Okay, with the airbox out of the way, we've gone ahead and removed the shock bolt on the left-hand side of the engine. 10mm bolt with a nylock nut. And then there's these 2 specialty washers that kind of help keep the shock centered. So you want to reach behind there, take that off. And as soon as you take that, in order to take that bolt off, sometimes you have to lift up on the motor a little bit to slide that bolt off. But you notice we've done that, and now the motor is back sitting on the ground, so the motor's dropped down a little bit. That's it at the back of the bike. Robot's going to go on to removing the front fastener here.
All right. As in an earlier step, got that one hose that's connected to the frame disconnected. You want to take the engine swing arm pivot bolt out. It's a real long bolt. Usually on your right-hand side, it's either a 15 millimeter or a 17 millimeter socket you'll need on the locking nut that they use. And you can see Steve's holding the wrench on the other side, 17 millimeter wrench. You know, to keep the bolt from spinning. It's got that on there. I'm gonna go ahead and zap that off. Oop.
Go ahead.
There we go. There's the nut.
And I'm gonna go ahead and remove the bolt now, robot, is that okay?
That's okay, and sometimes you gotta vary how much pressure is on the scooter. You can see a spacer also fell out.
Well, you must have a sweet spot because that bolt pulled out virtually effortlessly, but there you go.
So there's the bolt. You got a spacer that also goes up in there.
And when you look underneath here, the swing arm actually stays installed in the actual frame. Is that correct, robot?
That's correct, yeah. We're gonna leave the actual, the subframe, swing arm, it's kind of the vibration isolation system. That all stays with the scooter.
I've never done this before, but it looks like from this point now, we're actually gonna go ahead and lift the frame back up and then slide the motor out towards this way like we're giving birth to a big old baby boy.
Yeah, go ahead and give it a little pull. We'll see if it hangs up on anything. Make sure your throttle body's not binding with anything. And you're gonna have to continually move the frame up as you pull the actual engine out. And kind of just keep an eye on everything. And eventually we can get the frame quite high, where we'll clear everything of the whole motor. You got the fuel line, it's actually hanging up on the thermostat housing. I'm popping that out of the way. So now we're almost home free right here. And again, it makes it a little easier when I have a lift like this and a little scissor jack. But look at that, we just gave birth to a motor.
Wow, 300 cc's of Italian muscle.
All right.
And now we can pretty much move this motor anywhere we want in the shop, workbench, anywhere we want to make it a little bit more convenient to work on. But I believe robot's gonna wheel in this cool snap-on tray we have with an adjustable height. And we'll be putting this motor up on that. Stay tuned.